Oh, hey Drew, how are you going? Today we're having a flight that we did about a week ago, flying up the Coromandel Peninsula. It is not a very forgiving place. There are very few land out options. This particular flight we got into trouble about 3 times, and one of them I had to start my engine to get away to save landing on a tiny little beach. I started off the flight like any normal ridge flight, towing out to the ridge. Luckily I'd done a test run of the engine, which is good because it warms it up and gets the fuel through it, so next time you start it, it's much faster to start and ready to go. So we trekked up the ridge and it was all pretty typical all the way up, until we had to dive back to Coromandel Township. Now for the guys who fly at our club and around this area, it's a great example of making sure that you only do this when you know the weather is good enough. And in this case, the wind just wasn't quite strong enough, especially down low level, for all these ridges up here to work. So this first area I got into trouble, got dumped as I trekked across to the next ridge downwind. I was surprised how much we got dumped. I was not expecting to get dumped that much. We lost pretty much 1,000 feet, from 1,900 feet down to 1,000 feet above sea level, which in this particular area, just over the hill is Coromandel airstrip, but I had to get over another set of hills to get there. These paddocks did not look very good in here. I'm going to be much more careful in the future about diving back here and being careful about getting dumped by the wave. I can't say these paddocks in here look very good.
Don't look too bad from this side.
Yeah, we're going up now, thankfully.
What height are you there, Tim?
1,200.
Yuck.
Oh, it'll get better pretty quick as we go up the hill here. Well, that was a bit iffy, I have to say. It did not look, got a bit lower than I wanted there. But now we're on these back ridges, it's working much better. We're climbing rapidly. So it might be an interesting, so we got dumped by wavy stuff off these hills, and it just didn't end, it just kept on going down, down, down. Anyway, now we're in range of the airfield here. In here, there's not a lot of options for landing. I'm sure we would have found something, but it's a bit iffy. Once we got out of there, we trekked along the ridge up towards the northern part. Now this is where it gets interesting, because I was expecting southwesterly winds onto all these ridges along here. I punched into this hill expecting to be working, and it turned out my hawk wind flipped around 180 degrees and said the wind was coming straight towards me and straight from the hill rather than onto the hill. And for a moment I thought, it's not working, it's broken, there's something wrong with the hawk. Well, that did not work well. I pushed into these hills thinking it'll be working, and it's not. And looking at the water, you can see, and my hawk told me that the wind was coming the other way. Very northerly rather than westerly. So I scampered back to this little ridge here, which is definitely into wind, and I'm just climbing up here. Dave went around the corner, I suspect, and he stayed well clear of it. I suspect that was the sensible thing to do. So yes, you can see on the water there, the wind is coming alongside the ridge, not up it, so whew, not good. So all these slopes in here weren't working like I thought they would. So I'm just climbing in here. I mean, the wind has to go somewhere and it's got to go up through here really. Alright, I just heard from Dave. He headed around the mountain here. The wind is wrapping around it. I can see it on the water just down here. and he was pushing into wind and he had to start his engine. So I'm going to give up that idea and head south again. So this big hill at the end of the peninsula, you know, the wind just was wrapping around it. Instead of going up and over, it was wrapping around, curling around and coming back the other way. So really interesting how that was working. The wind was obviously just a bit different up at this end. Wind in general wants to wrap around hills rather than go up and over, if it can, because it's fighting gravity. So it's easier to go around something than over something. I'm sure if you're high enough and got onto that hill, it'll be fine, but... Righto, let's start heading back. I'm only 1600 feet, but these, I don't think I can get much higher here. So what we'll try and do is get onto these back ridges and run along that. There are clouds up there and back there. Or do I stay out the front here and try and go around the front? Good question. Maybe we'll try the front to see how it goes for a little bit. First, it's 29 knots of wind now, so once you get high enough it's good and windy, but down low it's obviously doing other things. I opted for staying out the front, which in hindsight I regret doing. Maybe the ridges at the back, they would have caught more wind, they would have been a little bit higher into the wind and probably would have generated more ridge lift. So I end up having to start my engine. Let's have a look, see how that went. This didn't work very well around here. The wind's too light, 11 knots. I mean, it's not going down, but we need to get onto some decent ridges. We'll find a thermal. I think there'll be a thermal or two going up there, but just a bit lower than I'd really like all the way along here. Start our engine if we can find a nice flat bit to land on. The beach down here looks pretty good. Fuel on, make sure we're getting a bit low now, 800 feet. We'll see what these ridges do here, but we've got some good landing options down here. Looks pretty safe at least. Might not be good when the tide comes in, but the GPS says 14 knots, but oh, there's a good bit. Let's do a figure of 8 here. See if we can climb up. This is a thermal going up here. Can't see or feel much wind here. Well, it says 8 knots, so we just get a bit higher. That would be, wind will work better higher. Oh, this is a demanding flight. Much harder than I thought it was going to be. Let's try and climb up this thermal going up the side of the hill here. Almost in more sink than lift, sadly. catch the thermal properly now. Here we go. 5 knots, that's great. Well, I thought I was going to start my engine then, I really did, but this might be our saviour. Just over these pine trees here. Don't want to get low and clip one of them, that's for sure. Woo. Off we go. Man, it is beautiful. Just going to focus on centering this thermal, see how high we can get. Ah shit, thermal's buggered off. Oh. Now here at this point, I really didn't have many options for continuing on. If I'd pushed back to the hills at the back, I would have ended up probably getting away. It probably would have worked. The wind didn't really have anywhere else to go. It would have had to go up there. But if it didn't work, and the wind was pretty light down low, so I wasn't sure it was going to, there were no landing options. The official Coromandel airstrip was quite a bit further on, and from what I could see, there were no good paddocks, there were no good beaches to land on, and the hills were too far back to risk it, essentially. The options are push back to the hill there, which is the only bit of lift, or stay out the front where there's very few landing options. I think I'm going to start my engine over this beach while I'm not too low. It's just a bit dodgy. So we can land down here in the low tide. It's just, no, I'm starting my engine too low. I don't want to push back too far. Right. Dive down. I only needed the engine for about a minute to get onto the hill, get a little climb 500 feet onto the hill, and then I was able to get away and find the good ridge lift again. So there's no point risking things unnecessarily, and the golden rule is always start your engine over somewhere good to land. Right, well after that little fuel burn we got back onto the hill proper, and up we go. After that we managed to have a great flight back to the airfield along the main part of the ridge, which was still working really well. To see you out, I've got a landing of me cutting across the runway to do this landing because of the crosswind. So I'm turning onto finals with 500 feet above the ground, or a bit less. And again we'll punch over to the right and land into wind, I think. Oscar Papa, finals, 28, landing short. Perfect. Yet again I can keep the glider level. You know, often with early takeoff you have to use extreme stick movements, and this is why, because it requires extreme stick movements just to stop it doing anything. And again, if I put it into a positive flap, Oh, no, this wind's strong enough, it's still working. Oh, no, I can't stop it. Fun. Try it next time you land. Thanks for watching, YouTube. Hope you enjoyed that little misadventure into getting into trouble up the Coromandel. Whew. You gotta be so careful, don't you? And I'm glad the tide was out, otherwise my options would have been very limited. I think we'll try and be a little more careful going up there in the future. Alright, see you later.